Hello and welcome, prospective Warhammer fans, for the extra bobs and bits of my previous video, Warhammer for Idiots. Today we'll be talking about the factions that were not listed last time, simply because they either resided within the nations that I spoke of earlier, they're a race that's too widespread to give a nation to, or are so minor that they weren't really worth mentioning in the last video. And just as a caveat, I don't make a script for this video, so I'm gonna be rambling a bit, but it's just to give basic information for people who just want to have a passing knowledge of the Warhammer world. To start off, we'll look at Sylvania, which is the land of the vampire counts. Now, Sylvania is a land that's dreary, filled with fog and mists, and it's constantly it's muddy, and it's a very grim place to live, which makes it a perfect place for the vampires to live in, really, because a lot of the ailments of humanity they don't really need to experience, and, you know, a lack of sun with all the fog is good for them. The vampires don't just live in Sylvania, though. They live all over the world, but Sylvania is a province in the Empire, so it's one of the 12 provinces. The Empire doesn't know that vampires rule there. The Empire used to know it, and the vampires did try to take over the Empire a few times. But the last battle with the vampires against the humans, they had the dwarves' help. The battle at Hel Finn. That was over 200 years before the current timeline. And ever since then, the vampires have been very quiet, at least relatively. Most dukes and barons in Sylvania are vampires, but some of them are not, but they will not out the vampires to the other imperial powers, because one, the dukes or barons that are human would usually want to become a vampire someday, and two, you know, they don't want to piss off vampires, and so they usually stay silent. In Sylvania, the dead often walk because plenty of necromancers and necromantic magic still lingers in the land, so it's not just has vampires in it. It's got, you know, it's a province like any other part of the Empire. It has orcs, goblins, beastmen, but at the same time it has more walking dead than most of the provinces, and of course a lot of the dukes and nobles, as I said, are vampires. But like I said earlier, vampires live all over the Warhammer world. I said in my previous video that the Emperor of Cathay, the Eternal Dragon Emperor, is largely implied to be a vampire. We don't exactly know that for sure, but it's heavily implied, so, you know. There's a lot of vampire different bloodlines. There's the von Karstein bloodline, which is essentially the main bloodline. There's the Lamian bloodline, which is filled with vampiric seductresses. I mean, most of them are female, not all of them, though. And there's the Blood Dragon bloodline, which is the strongest warriors of the vampires. There's a fair amount of bloodlines stemming from different sires. And vampires are like you would expect from grim fairy tales. They are immortal, essentially, unless you kill them. They can hypnotize men by either looking in their eyes or by drinking their blood. They can turn people into vampires if they wanted to. They control. They usually are very good spellcasters. They're far stronger and tougher and quicker than the average human, and they need to drink blood to survive. Essentially, there's plenty of cities in the Empire do have vampire covens that are just not really noticed, or that kind of live in plain sight in a way. Like, they're usually very secretive, but at the same time they do it so the vampires can, you know, keep tabs on humans, so they can have plenty of people's blood to drink, and also to you know, run businesses and stuff, because they do want to live. They think they should rule over humans, but they won't, like, do all-out war again unless a single vampire leader, like, rises to the fore and says to do it. But you know, after the last few incursions into the Empire, even though they were very successful for a while, after being defeated a few times, they don't really want their existence to be wiped out, so they usually try to stay silent. Like I said, relatively. Alright, the next is the Moot, and the Moot is also a province in the Empire. The Moot land is where the Halflings live, or hobbits. They don't use the word hobbit, but, you know, that's essentially what they are. And just like every race in the Warhammer world, their race is taken to the extreme. meaning the halflings in Warhammer are extremely lazy, they steal a lot, extremely sneaky, they're extreme pranksters, they eat a ton, like 8 or 9 meals a day, they're very good cooks, I don't know if I said they're very greedy. Yeah, they're pretty much regular hobbits, but taken up to 11. They are just unapologetic in how they are. And just like the vampires, not all of them live in their home province. You know, they're all over the Empire and all over the world, too, like halflings travel. But mostly you would only see them in the Empire, and mostly you'd only see those in the Empire in the Mootland. It's run by a sheriff or a mayor, and it's tolerated by the other provinces. There was at one point when one of the counts of another province invaded the Mootland because the halflings said, sure, you can march your army through our land, and as the count did, the halflings stole most of the army's supplies and then lied about it, and then said, hey, we'll give you your stuff back if you pay us, or stuff like that. And, you know, they thought it was a joke, a pretty funny joke, but the count did not, and then subsequently attacked the Mootland and slaughtered a lot of halflings. Halflings are not the best warriors. They're good thieves, and they're pretty good archers, though. There are some halfling archers in the Imperial Army. There's some halfling scouts, but mostly halflings are either bakers, cooks, or thieves. Or intelligence, you know, they gathering intelligence, stuff like that, you know, for various jobs whenever they're in cities of bigger people. All right, now we're going to talk about Albion. Albion is not in the Empire or Norsca or, you know, anywhere else really. It's an island that's about 100 miles north of the Empire's northern coast. It is essentially Celtic Britain. It's Britain if the Romans and the Anglo-Saxons, or the Normans, did not go and conquer Britain. A bunch of Scots, Irish kind of people. They live in clan societies. It has a lower technological level than the Empire and even Britannia, but they're not like cavemen. They still have iron weapons and stuff like that, but they hardly have any armor. They have kind of pretty basic shields. They usually use spears. There's no gunpowder. You know, no fancy engineering. They cover themselves in woad paint. They are very suspicious of a lot of things. There are orcs in Albion as well. Orcs don't really breed like most races in the Warhammer world, or most races in any universe, really. Orcs procreate, or recreate, or whatever, by releasing spores, because orcs are like half fungus, half creature, and they release spores as they move around, and they release a lot of spores when they die. And an orc will, you know, and those spores will eventually, if the conditions are right, which they usually are, will grow to be orcs or goblins. You know, they'll just essentially grow up to become them. The spores will. So once orcs go into a certain place, it's hard to get them out. And in Albion, there are also giants. Now, the giants are very, very obviously large beings. They're usually about 60 foot tall, but they're kind of like cavemen. They don't really have the technology of normal humans. They used to be very technologically advanced, and they used to be a very advanced society, but the ogres kind of took care of that along with the shifting of the world, so the giants are now kind of like across the Warhammer world. Some of them are in the Drakewald and the Empire, but a lot of them are in Albion. Albion is famous for their giants. And orcs raided Albion at one point, and now, you know, there are orcish clans that fight the human clans. But it's usually very hard to get into Albion, because it's a land that's surrounded by cliffs and rocky waters, and it's a land covered in mists, and it rains a lot, so it's like, you know, you're going to going to a place that's very hard to sail to, and to, you know, get on. The Dark Elves do love to steal slaves from there. And because the Albion humans are so cut off from the world, really, they don't really know a lot of the outer world, and so they think all elves are dark elves. They don't remember ever having met dwarves before, so they don't really know them. it's hard to tell if they've ever actually seen anything that has gunpowder in it. And they only have base magic, although some of their druids are pretty powerful. And a note is that the druids of Albion actually guard important druid stones. Now, these stones, you'd think they'd just be superstitious and would think that any stone or tree is something important to protect. But actually, the stones that they protect do have magic in them, and those stones are connected to the Elven Way lines, which is the lines of magic that encompass the entire Warhammer world that keeps chaos from overcoming the world. And the druids protect them, which, even if they don't exactly know that they have that kind of importance, it's holy to the druids and holy to the clans. So the druids protect them, and, it's fairly big coincidence, although I do think the druids actually kind of, realize that these stones do have magic in them. Next, we're going to talk about the Beastmen. The Beastmen are essentially the Warhammer equivalent to the Roman views of the barbarian at the gates. The Beastmen are extremely barbaric, tough, big, bestial, and they hate all kinds of order. They hate order of any kind. And Beastmen absolutely cover the Warhammer world. They're everywhere, and there's a shit ton of them. And Beastmen generally believe that they are the epitome of chaos. The way Beastmen were created was back when chaos ran rampant through the world, while the elves hid in their island that was covered with magic, and while the dwarves hid underground. And the humans that could not find caves to hide in were changed, and they were fused with the animals of the forest, and they became the first Beastmen. So they're products of chaos. And they usually live in tribes or herds, and they travel around, and they'll kill anything that they find, even each other sometimes. But they hate humans the most. They hate dwarves, they hate elves, they fight orcs and goblins a lot, they fight pretty much anything, but if they had to choose what race they would wipe out, it would be humans, because they believe that humans are the tainted bastard brother of their race, or kind of like, the forces of order, when the Beastmen are the forces of chaos, and they just want to destroy the establishment. Okay, now, if you think that the Beastmen are a horde army, and the orcs and goblins are horde armies, as in there's a lot of them, the Skaven are the biggest of all of them. If you got every Beastman and every orc and goblin on the Warhammer world and put them together, combine their numbers, I don't think that it would reach half of the Skaven in the Warhammer world. The Skaven are almost limitless in number. They are the vile rat men. Skaven are essentially 4 to 5 foot tall, man-like rat creatures with rat heads, and they pretty much, and most of them are very expendable. Most of them are like clan rats and Skaven slaves, and low birth, and they live and they breed with breeder rats, which are essentially giant female Skaven. Most Skaven that you'll find is male, because like whenever there's female Skavens, they essentially like set them up in a certain place in a Skaven society underground, and they essentially just breed with them all day and night. So that's their only really exposure for the female Skaven. But Skaven live all across the Warhammer world, and they usually live underground. And honestly, because they usually live underground, and because they the humans, or of the Empire at least, and a few of the other human nations, believe that Skaven are a myth, and if they ever do see a Skaven, that they think that the Skaven are like a offshoot of Beastmen, when that is not true. It was true in like the first edition of Warhammer, but since then it's become like that's just not true. The Skaven are actually fairly technologically advanced, although, as I said, most Skaven live terrible, glum lives of just throwing themselves at certain things or enemies or projects, and most of them die in droves. It's just they breed so much, it doesn't matter, just like normal rats. But there are 12 Skaven clans. Some of them excel in building technologically advanced things and weapons, and some of them excel in mutating certain things and creating abominations, and some of them are great assassins like Clan Eshin, and some of them are plague priests. It would take a while to talk about the Skaven, but if you want to hear their founding myth, I do have another video about the Skaven origins if you want to check that out. But the Skaven are also probably the most evil faction in the Warhammer world. The Dark Elves are evil, and they're very sadistic and torturous, but they became that way because of like grievances in a civil war. Like Chaos is obviously evil, but at the same time people turn to Chaos because they don't see any other way in their lives usually they become addicted to it and they can't help it. A lot of the time. Sometimes people are just assholes enjoying it. But the Skaven, they're just selfish, and they'll backstab you and themselves all the time. If you have an alliance with the Skaven, it's only a matter of time before he backstabs you. Skaven are just selfish. They'll always blame someone else for their problems. And they've almost ruined the world more than a few times. And there's just untold billions of them, and they usually fight the dwarves, or the orcs and goblins that are underground. But yeah, essentially, those are the factions that I didn't get a chance to talk about earlier, and I just wanted you guys to know. Alright, that's everything I want to talk about today. Please like, subscribe, or comment if you enjoyed the video, and thank you so much, guys. See you.